Everyone, I'd like to call this meeting to order, the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of March 27, 2024, City of Albany, 7 p.m., regular meeting. To order, I'd like to read the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lejeune. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. With that, will staff do the roll call, please?
Yes. Commissioner Pilch.
Here.
Commissioner Moman.
Here.
Commissioner Waddy has an excused absence, and Chair McLeod.
Here.
Great.
Okay, next on the agenda is ex parte communications. Have there been any? No. Seeing none, I've had none. So moving on to item 4, consent calendar. Is just the meeting minutes of January 24th, 2024. Anyone wish to pull the minutes from the consent calendar? No corrections? Does anyone from the audience wish to pull the minutes from the consent calendar? Any member of the public?
If you'd like to pull the item on the consent calendar, speak of it, please use the raise the hand icon at the bottom of the screen.
None? Okay, well, then we can move ahead to that item. Is there a motion to approve?
I move the consent calendar.
And I second.
All right, I'll take the vote. Commissioner Moman?
Yes.
Commissioner Pilch? Yes. And I vote yes, so the minutes have been approved. Item 5, announcements, communications, discussion, anything from staff?
Well, I would like to, I think this is the first time you've met our new associate planner, Mira Hahn, so I'm very excited that she has joined our team. It's been a little over a month now, and most recently from Hayward and previously quite a few years in Piedmont, as well as Austin, Texas, so we're very happy to have her.
Right.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Likewise, thank you.
Next is item 6, public comment for persons desiring to address the commission on an item that is not on the agenda. Please note that each speaker is limited to up to 3 minutes, and the Brown Act limits the commission's ability to take or discuss these items. Are there any members of the public who would like to make public comment for the good of the city, or any member online?
If you'd like to speak, please use the raise the hand icon. No.
No, okay.
Chair, can I just use this opportunity to ask if we've had an appointment yet for our vacant seat here on the commission?
It's my understanding that we have not. We have not had a very robust pool of candidates, so if you know anyone, Albany resident, please encourage them to apply.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll just restate that. We do have an opening on our commission, Planning and Zoning Commission, and the application forms are online, and we would encourage anyone interested and qualified in city planning or architecture or any other related field to apply. It would be great. It would really be good to have another person here. So moving on to item 7, 7-1, planning application 24-007. 1033 Curtis Street, design review, request to construct an approximately 123 square foot, 2-story addition at the front, et cetera, and I will ask staff for a presentation.
So, good evening, Planning and Zoning Commissioners and members of the public. So we're here to go over design review and use permit application number PA 24007 at 1033 Curtis Street. So as we can see here on this slide, that's the project location. So it's the one, of course, highlighted in red. And so on this elevation drawing, we can see the street view in relation to the neighboring properties. It's the property in the middle. That's the existing condition of the home. So the project request is to add a 123 square foot, two-story addition at the southwest front and right side of the residence to accommodate a larger bedroom and a new bathroom on the upper level and additional storage space on the basement level. So it also includes a new 90 square foot deck at the rear, new windows at the upper level addition, and this would result in a two-bedroom, two-bathroom, 1,773 square foot home with a maximum height of 17 feet 4 inches. So we can see here the proposed site plan, and so the areas are highlighted in green. We see the front addition and the rear deck. In here we see the existing elevations of the home and the proposed, very nicely colored. And so we can see on the south elevation, we see the projected bay window. We see the deck at the rear. And on this slide, we can appreciate the proposed materials and colors, which are to match the existing architectural features and colors, materials of the home. These are the renderings. So basically, the addition would be around this area. So for projects which exceed 45% FAR, so these are subject to exceptional design, as you know, as reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Proposed design treatments to retain the architectural style of the house include keeping defining elements such as the covered front porch and the roof line, using matching materials such as painted cement plaster at the walls and decorative clay tile roof at the proposed bay window. Also, new aluminum-clad windows are to be recessed approximately 2 inches from the face of the building. So we did not receive any correspondence or communications from the public in regards to this project proposal. And, I lost that one, but yeah, staff is recommended to Planning and Zoning Commission to approve the project as proposed, as it meets all the standards.
Okay, thank you very much. Do any commissioners have any questions for staff, first of all? No?
No.
Do we have any questions for the applicants?
No.
No. Why don't we go to public comment on this? You want to speak to us, or? You're welcome to come to the dais or the podium and introduce yourself and speak.
Hi, good evening, members of the commission. My name is Brian Crossman. I'm the applicant. My wife and my 2 daughters lived in this house since 2017, and we're hoping to add a second bathroom and a little bit more space for our family. I just want to thank you for your time tonight and your staff, who's been tremendously helpful in getting our application to this point. I don't have a presentation, but I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission has.
Any questions?
No.
I don't have any questions either, so.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just say one thing. What I found out was that, well, as you know,
Excuse me, could you introduce yourself, please?
as you know, you're allowed to deduct 220 square feet from the area of a house to determine FAR if it's a garage. It doesn't say what kind of garage, but the assumption is that it's an automobile garage. We don't have an automobile garage because the dimensions don't match. What we have is a garage for bicycles, for e-bikes. Theoretically, you could have motorcycles. It's a garage by building code definition because it's going to have the things in it that you normally associate with the garage. You're going to store paint. That's where you're going to store probably some flammable materials, not a lot, but it's still a garage. We have to call it that. But we don't get to take the 200 square feet plus away from the building area for the FAR calculation because it's for bikes and not cars. It throws us over the 45%.
Is that because there's not a garage door or there's a smaller door?
It won't have a garage door because when we do the portal seismic reinforcement, there won't be enough room. It'll be perfect for bicycles, but not for a car. So I think that's a little perverse for a community that favors bicycles. If you have a garage and you want to only use it for bicycles, you don't get to deduct the area.
And just for the record, could you identify yourself?
Sorry, what?
Could you identify yourself? The public doesn't know who is speaking right now.
Howard, the architect, Howard McNenny.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.
I just thought I'd throw that. I'll answer any questions regarding the design if you like.
I don't really have any.
Fairly modest addition.
Okay, thank you. So there was no other public comment online or anything?
If you'd not written ahead of time, if someone would like to speak on this item, please use the raise the hand icon. Someone just joined. If the new guest would like to speak to the item, 1033 Curtis Street, please use the raise the hand icon. No one wishes to speak.
Okay, I will close public comment and move on to commissioner discussion. Are there comments?
I can start. I don't think there's much to say. It's pretty minor project and looks fine to me. Very interesting comment by the architect, though, about the FAR calculations, something we should keep in mind maybe for future code revisions. But I'm ready to support this item at this time. In fact, I'll go ahead, we can continue discussion, but I'll go ahead and move that we accept the, or that we approve the planning application 24-007.
Okay, Commissioner Moman?
Yeah, I support the project as designed and second the move.
Okay, all right, I will just say, yeah, I like the project. You know, looking at the before and after elevations, I think it's a big improvement. You know, it's very boxy to begin with, and I think you've done a nice job to give it some relief and, yeah, make it look more attractive. And I'm always for these things that make these houses more livable and able to support families. You know, they are small, a lot of them, and it doesn't necessarily take a huge amount to make it much better. So, well done on that account. The only other question the only other thought I had is that if it is subject to exceptional design review, we're supposed to have a landscape plan, I believe, and I'm not sure I saw
It's a
one.
conditional approval, I think that's the procedure now, right?
Yeah, so I would just leave that to the applicants to provide a landscape plan at the building permit submittal, but it does need to be developed somewhat with some planting and show what you're intending to do for the landscape plan. So that would be the only thing. Otherwise, again, I support the project. Interesting comment about the storage or bike storage versus car storage, why we would not give an exemption for what would be bike storage, is something we should probably look at. I think that's a good point. Thank you for raising it. So with that, we'll go to a vote. Commissioner Moman?
Yes.
Commissioner Pilch?
Yes.
I vote yes as well, so that has passed. So item 7-1, planning application 24-007, 1033 Curtis Street has been approved. You don't have story poles up, so there is a 14-day appeal period, but they do have story poles up. Oh, okay, they do have story poles up. Well, they're supposed to remain up for another 14 days till the appeal period is done. All right, thank you very much.
Congrats.
Moving on to item 8, new business, 8-1, Albany Hill Forest Management and Habitat Restoration Plan. Information-only item, and we will turn to Jeff Bond.
Yes, thank you, Chair McLeod. Jeff Bond, the Community Development Director. It's my pleasure to make two different presentations to you this evening. This first agenda item is on our street tree, excuse me. Which one am I?
The Albany Hill Forest.
Albany Hill, sorry. I had them in the wrong order here. The Albany Hill Forest Management and Habitat Restoration Plan. To begin my presentation, I want to let you know that I am not the subject matter expert on preparing these plans. We have hired consultants and my working colleagues in the Public Works Department in preparing these plans. But I think they're very interesting in general for as members of the community who care a lot about Albany. I think you'll find them interesting, and hopefully members of the public also will engage in our process of preparing these plans. They're works in progress. The Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Commission is taking, and generally speaking, taking the lead in kind of the guidance that comes from the commission, the various city commissions. But I do think it is relevant, larger picture to the future of the city that, of course, is within the purview of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'll also add that this presentation in particular, I abbreviated it quite a bit to stay a little bit more in the areas that I have at least some working knowledge of. If you're really interested in this, I'd encourage you to go back and watch the March 14th Planning, Parks, Recreation, Open Space Commission meeting where the consultants made a detailed presentation, and there was quite a bit of back and forth with the commission. So with that, I'm going to dive into this and begin by sharing my screen. Let's see right here. Bear with me a second as I get positioned here. So this is a project that really began a few years ago when, during the drought years, began to notice that some of the eucalyptus trees were stressed, didn't look healthy. Some research was underway both at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, over here, some of the forest ecologists there, and at UC Berkeley. And what was learned was that there is a pathogen that is getting into the eucalyptus trees that are weakening the trees. And particularly in drought years, it's more prevalent. And for a while, it really, you could visually tell that the trees were stressed and some of them were dying. This created a whole range of concerns. Wildfire is one of them, the habitat for the monarch butterfly, which is on Albany Hill, and beginning the thought process of what's next if the trees do need to be removed. So ultimately, that led to the city getting a grant, which is funding the project that I'll be presenting to you this evening. The lead consultant is Restoration Design Group, RDG is the acronym. They do a fair amount of work with us. They've done a lot of work on Cordneses Creek. They designed the recently completed trail connection. They've actually designed a few of the segments of restoration at Cordneses Creek. And they've also designed the paved trail up on Albany Hill from the top of Taft up towards the ridge line. Along with them are two other firms. Nomad Ecology are biologists. They're experts in particular in some of the wildlife and plants, and Creekside Science, which has a particular expertise in the monarch butterflies, which are particularly sensitive species in this area. And the idea for this plan is really to create a long-term vision. I won't read this purpose statement, but it's really to get ahead a little bit of what is evolving out there and to recognize the hazards that are presented with climate change and wildfires and so forth, to try to get move us towards a good future for the Hill that balances all these things. This project timeline, I realize, is probably difficult to read on the screen, but, and incidentally, for members of the public that might be listening, this presentation is linked to the commission's agenda, so it might be easier to read by downloading. But the big picture of this timeline is to be able to show you that it's something that's been a work in progress for quite a while, and we're somewhere in the middle of it. So there is more work to be done and certainly more opportunities for engagement. The portion of the hill that we're talking about is this area that's highlighted in the middle. And to get you oriented here, north is on the left-hand side of the screen, and west towards the bay is towards the bottom of the screen. So on this image, you can kind of see a little bit of the condos on Pierce Street. And then on the top is Jackson and Madison Street. So what we're really looking at are the city-owned and controlled portions of this, of the top of the hill. In the bottom right-hand corner of this image is the 11-acre privately owned piece of property. It has many of the same issues, and I think a lot of what is coming out of this study of the city-owned property will ultimately be very applicable to decisions that will definitely fall within your purview regarding the future of that 11-acre parcel. So another reason why it's important for the commission to know about this. But at the moment, we're really just focused in on this particular area where we have the ability to move and responsibility for its care.
Jeff, sorry to interrupt, but just since you have this slide up, can you point to where that 11-acre parcel is?
Sure. Does that
Basically there?
does that cursor show up?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So what are those yellow lines? Those are property boundaries, or those are some?
The yellow lines were some section drawings.
Not those vertical and horizontal. Those.
These here?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so those are some of the informal walking trails that are out there.
Trails, I see.
And there's some more here. These are a little bit more formal in this area. Some of this is city controlled, but it has a different ecology. The north side of Albany Hill is more of a native oak woodland. And so this is a very distinct, it's fascinating that you have really two different ecological environments so close to each other in such a small area. So we're really focused in on the areas that are primarily eucalyptus.
Just one more question. Like, were these planted, like, I think during 40s and 50s, a lot of open spaces, had eucalyptus plantation. A lot of regional parks have those, I think, So were these planted, or they were?
It's an interesting question, and the story I've heard, and I'll just say it's a story, I don't know how true it is, but the legend, I guess, is that, well, it's not, the fact is, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was a dynamite factory in this area. And there was an explosion, serious explosion, and I think the idea was to plant eucalyptus trees to help buffer the surrounding community from the dangers of this dynamite factory. Also in those days, I think people thought there was value to these eucalyptus trees, which turns out to be not true. That's an urban legend. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I've heard.
I see. So
And then once they take hold, there's no stopping them, I guess.
So very similar to Pinole Point.
Excuse me?
Very similar to Pinole Point.
I don't know much about the history of Pinole Point, but probably.
There too, there was a dynamite factory. Yeah.
Yeah. There was also a dynamite factory out on Golden Gate Fields, which is, there was a lot of dynamite in those days. I don't know what that was all about, but. Moving on to the next slide, if that's all right. This image is just to give you a notion of kind of the three big areas that we're trying to find the middle ground and balancing fire safety, monarchs, and native habitat. The presentation that follows, the consultant really wanted to go through the exercise of what would a maximum fire safety scenario look like, what would a maximum protection of the monarch butterflies look like, and what would a sort of a maximum of the native habitat protection look like. And then ultimately, haven't gotten there yet, but ultimately come back with, here's the balance. So I'm not presenting the balance right now. The consultant is still working on that, but we are presenting kind of the edges of the options that are before us. Start with fire safety, and as some of you know, we did have a close call a couple summers ago in the summer of 2022 where there was a wildfire that started, it was arson, and it moved quickly. Fortunately, our firefighters moved little bit more quickly, and we're able to stop it before it did any damage. But it moved quickly up the hill, and it was kind of a sobering reminder that these dangers are very real all over the Bay Area, including on Albany Hill. So, you know, the question is kind of how can we be better prepared for that in the future? And in talking about this and working with the fire department, these are the things that the fire department are interested in. They need to be able to get up there quickly, which is what they were able to do. They want to be able to interrupt what they call fire ladders, and that's basically where a fire starts on the ground and kind of works its way up the tree and then jumps from one tree to the next. And it's particularly an issue on slopes where as the fire is going up one tree, it starts the fire on the tree that's up a little higher, and it's just like taking steps up a ladder. The fire can move uphill pretty quickly. They are acknowledge and make a priority to make sure that it's still an aesthetic and enjoyable place to be, and it's not just a cut everything down kind of place, but a beautiful park. And then, as we've talked about a little bit, the eucalyptus trees are a particular fire hazard and not a native tree, and so looking at ultimately encouraging alternatives to those eucalyptus. So one of the priorities, if we're going to be maximize tree safety, or fire safety, is to really look at the trees that are closest to existing residences and create more of a buffer between the residents and the Albany Hill forest. And so this image shows some of those ideas in 3 different kind of color coding. The red is sort of the priority, where you know, if the fire got into that area, the homes across the street would be at quite severe risk. These are also areas where we've had some issues with erosion and storm damage from trees falling. Last winter we had 2 or 3 trees come down. Got lucky that it didn't land on any property, but the combination of erosion and winds and stormy conditions, it's not just fire safety. And we'll talk a little bit later in more detail about monarchs, but basically these are areas that are not significant to the success of the monarch butterfly habitat. The orange areas, kind of orangish yellow color here, is also other areas that would be kind of later phases of potential removal where we would want to improve the buffer and for the fire break, essentially. Moving along, this is just an image of some of the work that we already do in that area. Our Public Works Department works with an organization called Urban Tilth to help do some of the fire hazard abatement out there on a regular basis, and this is an image of that. So as I mentioned, this would be kind of the initial phase if we were going to do a maximum fire protection scenario of removing the eucalyptus in these areas and protecting some of the other more native, more fire-resistant trees. Future phases would be to continue into the kind of more in the heart of the forested area and continue eucalyptus removals in selected areas and protect the oaks and try to create an environment where the oak can get enough sunlight to be successful.
Could you go back to phase 1? It talks about the larger size chip mulch. Do you know what the significance of that is?
Getting a little bit out of my area expertise, but I believe it has to do with how flammable the material is that is left there if we leave it there. That's a whole nother challenge is when you take out a lot of these materials, where does that mulch go? And so to the extent that we can use it and keep it here without creating more fire hazard, that is the extent of my knowledge. as I was saying, phase two is kind of go into move away a little bit more from the homes along Jackson Street and Taft Street and create more of a fire break and thin out some of those eucalyptus areas, and give the oaks a better chance to thrive. And then the final one here is to look in areas that are getting a little bit more significant for butterflies and further away from private property to be a little bit more selective about removal and really getting them out as they die and maybe pruning them up a little bit. So in the case of a less intense fire, the fire can run along on the ground and not get up into the canopy of the tree where it really gets potentially a much more serious and more challenging fire to control for the fire department. If it stays down on the ground, they can get to it much more easily. The second, as I mentioned, the second area that is looking at here is prioritizing the native habitat. And that is bringing the Albany Hill back to towards its condition that it was a century ago or more. And really creating an environment where more native plants can be successful. What's interesting, and I hadn't really thought about this, but it's a really interesting area, is the slide points out, it has a wide diversity of plantings already. It is a unique topographical feature in that it's one of the few just kind of standalone hills that's close to the bay, and it receives kind of a mix of sunshine and cool fog, which part of the reason the butterflies really like it. So it's an interest. It's relatively small compared to, say, a regional park, but it's an interesting ecological area. Moving along here, these are the kinds of things that we would want to maximize if we were trying to focus solely in on native plantings. It's the oaks and open grasslands, basically coastal grasslands. And the image below is a painting, but I've seen other old photographs of Albany Hill from many, many years ago where it was much more open than it is today, not as heavily forested. This would be kind of the proposal in this green area would be to clear out some of those eucalyptus and give the native grasses and the oaks, again, a chance to thrive.
Ask
Yeah.
a quick question. What does the term snags refer to? Or
Dead tree stumps.
dead tree stumps. Okay, thank you.
So there are animals that like those things. And they are just, I think there are some birds that, I don't know which species, but there are birds that particularly thrive in those. Here's kind of an example of the kind of thing where these shrubs and the grasses would be more aligned with what a native habitat would look like rather than the eucalyptus. The area here in green would be areas where we try to do some selective plantings and also focus on removing the invasive plants. They're not just eucalyptus trees, not necessarily. And this is kind of the summary of what would be done: selective and basic eucalyptus removals, trying not to disturb the ground too much, and with back to the question about the mulch, it also, as it noted on this slide, it helps control weeds. And we have, this last point is kind of interesting, we have worked with an organization that is really focused on trying to reuse cut lumber, and so creating benches and steps and other things like that. We're already starting to do that out there. If you see some of the railroad tie-sized steps. Those are actually coming from eucalyptus trees that have fallen or been cut. This slide, this shaded area in this slide really shows areas where there would be protecting the oaks and removing eucalyptus. Another interesting consideration that I've learned about this is there would be an effort to avoid dragging things, as dragging trees as they're removed. They're kind of a crude way of moving these trees off the hill would be just put a chain on them and a tractor and drag it down, but that can be damaging to the grasses and shrubs that we want to protect in the habitats. So there would be particular consideration to that. Moving along here, this is an example of the eucalyptus steps I was mentioning. And again, this is a good example of kind of areas that are starting to thin out a little bit. This is a slide showing those snags. So it looks like there's about a half a dozen or so that have been identified to scatter those around as habitat for animals.
Did it ever come up? I know I've always heard that eucalyptus loves to resprout. So I'm surprised to hear about leaving stumps because that seems problematic that they would resprout.
I think part of the task, the long-term maintenance task, would be to make sure that those don't resprout. Gotcha. And if there's a limited number of them, that you can keep an eye on it. But you're right, they grow like weeds, and there are examples out there where you'll see, if you look carefully, you'll see where there's an older stump and then a relatively younger tree that's come up. And third leg of the stool, so to speak, is prioritizing monarchs. This is an important, Albany Hill is an important habitat for migrating monarch butterflies. They are a threatened species. This image shows some of the locations where they're successful in the Bay Area. Their populations go up and down pretty dramatically from year to year. And Albany Hill here, labeled AH, is one of the important locations. Some of the other nearby ones, Richmond Field Station, Point Pinole, down in the, and then there are some in the San Leandro area as well. And further down in Fremont, there's Ardenwood Farm, which is also pretty famous for their butterfly habitat. Again, the question kind of becomes, if there were no other factors, what would we do to maximize the benefit to the monarch butterflies? What's interesting about, and what we've learned is important to the butterflies, are kind of a mix of light breeze and sunshine and shade. They're very sensitive to too much of any one of those things. They like to be in kind of, the consultants use the term dabbled light, where there's a little bit of light that comes in that warms them up, but not too much, and then have a windbreak so that there's not a heavy breeze, but there's enough breeze to kind of, again, I guess for them to be successful as they're overwintering, to have that kind of mix of sunlight and breeze. And so the areas that are labeled on this image here, the important areas are the windbreaks here in the bottom right hand of the screen and kind of the bottom center of the screen. And then the area where they seem to be most successful and happiest is this area in between those two. So
do those locations have anything to do with the buildings on the,
the buildings may be helping, actually.
they are helping? Or they're kind of, there are no monarch colonies on the, east side of these buildings. So are they kind of blocking the wind and,
They could be blocking the wind.
because they are kind of concentrated on, the southeast side of those PS Street buildings, in the open area. which has, I think, access to the wind.
There's, apparently there's enough windbreak where the combination of the buildings and the existing trees
Right,
that,
okay.
and some of the trees are, our consultant, Stu Weiss, has gotten to the level of detail of like individual trees that are critical to
Really? Wow.
the wind patterns, and he's done lots of analysis with wind patterns and sunlight patterns, and so it's very interesting. And some of his work, incidentally, is in the Public Works Department webpage about Albany Hill. He's done some really interesting technical analysis. That's way, I wouldn't want to speak too
Yeah, because
far with that because it's way out of my area of expertise.
the reason I was asking that because it, I think, would factor heavily when we, talk about the 11-acre lot,
That's right.
on the development potential and constraints of that.
Yes. It will be, I think, when we explore the opportunities and issues with the 11-acre lot, we're going to have to spend a lot of time understanding that and analyzing that. No question about it. One of the interesting things about this is the monarch habitat, the areas that are critical in monarch habitat are down at the bottom of the screen. So the areas over here closer to the homes that we've talked about are not significant to the trees. They're downwind of the habitat. They're not blocking the sun. They're not blocking the wind. So we can feel pretty good about some of these other measures and not risking the butterfly habitat. There is some areas, this is another area of monarch butterfly habitat and windbreak, and one of the thoughts is that there would be some areas where we would want to plant some replacement trees, whether it's a different form of eucalyptus or something else, to, if we're taking out the hazardous eucalyptus or the dead eucalyptus, to replace them in some cases. Whereas in other parts of the hill, we might not be replacing trees with something that the butterfly would benefit from. In some places, we might want to do that on a selective basis. So again, kind of to summarize the butterfly habitat objectives, it's replacing the trees that have a better fire profile, and again, there's a particular type of trees, and I guess eucalyptus, for better or worse, is a tree that the monarchs like. But there are other trees that they would be successful with as well. And then just being attentive to which areas that are more important than the particular trees to protect. This slide talks about a little bit about creating some ground plane nectar sources, basically food for the butterflies in the surrounding areas, so that again, just trying to help improve their habitat to have some food sources for them. So getting to the end here, this is a summary of all three priorities and some of the pros and cons. The issues of fire safety, and then I haven't up to this point discussed cost, but there are issues of just cutting down trees is relatively inexpensive. It gets progressively more expensive for maximizing the benefits to the monarchs and maximizing the benefits to the native habitat. So this is kind of where we are, the consultant team is today. They're going to be taking in more public comment, weighing these options, and ultimately coming back to us with some ideas for kind of that sweet spot of balancing all three. And with that, I believe that's the last slide.
Okay, thank you very much. Why don't we take public comment?
I just have a couple more questions, if you
Okay,
don't mind.
I was going to say public comment, and then we can ask more questions, or
Whichever way you want to do it.
why don't we get public comment out of the way? I don't imagine there's anybody, but
If you'd like to speak on this, please use the raise the hand icon.
Yes, we have somebody. Great.
We have my colleague Margot Cunningham with the Public Works Department. I'm glad Margot.
Okay, terrific.
Oops, talking permitted. I think you're muted, though.
Okay. Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Great. I'm Margot Cunningham, Natural Areas Coordinator for the City of Albany. And thank you, Jeff, for that presentation about the plan. So I've been working with the consultants, and I encourage you to go to the Albany Hill website, which I think there was a QR code on that last slide. And if you scroll down to the Albany Hill Eucalyptus Project, there's all kinds of good information on this, the plan. The most recent session that we had that Jeff talked about is at the Parks Commission, we had a community design session, and the slides he got, he put some of those slides in his talk, and there's a lot more slides, and there's also a link to the video of the consultants explaining everything. And so that session was really about three things: fire, monarchs, and native plant habitat, native plant and wildlife habitat, I should say. And we really want to, because those are the three main things that are going to be going into this plan. And we want to get feedback from people, including everybody here, about what are your priorities, and that's why we came up with this online survey. And there's a link to that survey on the Albany Hill webpage under the Community Design Session tab. And it's a survey, it'll take you 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes if you read more on the background. And so we encourage everybody to go through that. And yeah, so we're going to come back in late spring or early summer with a draft plan after we've gotten feedback from everyone. And then a final plan will be coming later on in the year. And then the next step after that is getting more funding for actually implementing the plan. And I'm available here to answer any questions that people may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other?
Would anyone else like to speak? No.
No. All right, I'll close public comment and we'll move on to commission discussion. Commissioner Pilch, you want to ask some questions?
Yeah, sure, thank you. And maybe Margot can chime in if Jeff is not familiar with some of these answers. But so going back to the mulch, there was the larger mulch that was probably more fire resistant. So I'm wondering, would there be a disadvantage to the larger mulch in terms of habitat? Is that what the larger versus the smaller mulch is the trade-off?
Margot, if you're there and have an answer, that would be great.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. The larger size mulch, I believe the fire department prefers larger size because it's less of a fire problem. And they don't like too much mulch either, so a maximum of 6 to 8 inches. Whereas the consultants, they've worked on some projects where they had a different kind of mulch. It was smaller sized and a lot deeper mulch because there were so many eucalyptus and they chipped up all these trees, and it was a way to basically to process the waste without removing the trees, because that's more expensive, removing them from the site. You just chip them on site and leave all the mulch there. And the advantage of the smaller sized, deeper mulch is that it acts to suppress weeds. So when we remove eucalyptus, it's going to open up a lot of sunlight, and a lot of weeds are going to say, hey, I've got sun, I'm going to sprout. So the advantage of the deep smaller size mulch is that it acts as a weed suppressant. But then the disadvantage is the fire department isn't so keen on that. They think it's more of a fire hazard.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. And a couple more, and maybe Margot, you can answer these as well. Yeah. Do we know if monarchs were there before eucalyptus were planted? And also, can we encourage the monarchs to migrate to other safe or safer areas?
Monarchs were likely not, I mean, they may have been flying by, but they were not roosting on the hill because there weren't any trees for them. All the monarchs, or most of the monarchs, historically overwintered in the Monterey Peninsula area when there was a lot more of the forest that was intact in that area. Since then, the forest has shrunk, so their habitat has shrunk, and for some reason, they like the eucalyptus. There's something about the shapes of the leaves and the branches and the tallness of the trees that attracts them. So in their migration, they found these eucalyptus along the coast in Point Pinole, Albany Hill, and several other areas. So yeah, they were not historically here. And what was the second
Can
question?
we encourage them to migrate to other safe or safer areas?
You mean if we cut down their trees and they can't overwinter here?
Yeah, well, that would be forcing them, but I mean, right before actually removing their habitat, are there other areas we can, I don't know, maybe the answer is no, but is there any possibility of encouraging them?
I don't think so. It's a delicate balance of, if you talk to Stu Weiss, our monarch biologist, he will tell you it's a delicate balance of, sometimes if you remove just a few trees, it changes the wind and sun dynamics in such a way that they don't like it anymore and they'll go somewhere else. So that's something we have to be careful about. But no, I don't know of any way where you can herd the monarchs to somewhere else. They discover these places on their own. And they've actually been overwintering more in greater numbers at the Gilt Tract. So that's a good sign.
That Gilt Tract also has some eucalyptus? I can't remember.
There are a few, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and redwoods actually. And
Oh, okay.
they've been planting some other trees there. And then the new housing that's going in there is actually going to be helpful for blocking the wind. There was a question earlier about wind and the buildings. The tall buildings on the west side of Albany Hill do act as a windbreak, so it's helpful for the monarchs further upslope.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right, well done. Commissioner Moman, questions or comments?
No question, just a few comments actually. Since the Albany Hill is kind of one ecological entity, and the ecological character of the hill is one. Unfortunately, it is divided in different parcels, and not all of the hill is owned by the city. City of course cannot look beyond city-owned property, and so I'm wondering, was there any discussion about effectiveness of, particularly the fire safety part of this exercise? Like if we are just looking into, at city-owned property and, mitigating the fire hazard, but right next to that we have, 5 times bigger area which has same kind of safe, fire hazard. How are we, dealing with that? The 11-acre property, is some hope, because in future we can have some, guidelines or some requirements, in lieu of development of that property, and we can, get all these strategies implemented there. but what happens to the, other properties, particularly on the west side of the hill,
Right, yes, that's a good question. I think we will want to learn from this, and a lot of the things that we are doing to our own property, we should be through, either encouragement and facilitation, or maybe ultimately, if necessary, regulation, applying it to other pieces of property first, later on. But, our thought was, first of all, we have a responsibility for a big chunk of this area, and we want to get our business
got it.
taken care of. As I mentioned earlier, I could definitely envision out of this study, when we talk about the 11-acre parcel, which we've talked about needing to do soon, that we would translate the lessons that we've learned here into design standards or zoning standards or something that would apply there.
Right.
For the existing condominiums, it will be our regulatory authority will be a little bit different than it would be over a new development, so we'd have to figure that out. And, that might end up being a little bit more of a partnership and helping them get grants or something for some of that work, because it can be expensive.
Okay, but it hasn't been initiated yet. We would first finish this study or this project, and then we would approach them. Means there is no plan like doing something simultaneously, like,
Yeah, we just don't have the capacity to
Got it, okay.
do more than a couple of things at a time.
Okay. Okay, yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I had similar ideas or interests or concerns. Kind of that buffer of the private property below the hill is kind of a very interesting zone in that it has a huge impact on the hill. We don't really have much control over it, and it looks like it's a very critical part of the monarch habitat. So, kind of somehow protecting that makes a lot of sense to me. And I just had a question. Are the existing condos, are they able to build more on the hillside slopes to the east of the existing buildings, or are they kind of maxed out at the moment, or?
Boy, that's an interesting question. I've never thought about that. Whatever it is, will certainly come through this commission.
Margot has raised her hand. Maybe she hasn't.
In terms of the zoning, I suppose theoretically, someone could come in and say, we want a general plan amendment and a zoning amendment to allow greater density on those properties. I don't think, those are all condominiums now, so there's not a single entity that is going to take that initiative, unlike
Single
owner or somebody who's going to want to come in and try to pull together, almost 900 separate condominium owners into one vision.
And there were no restriction on development similar to the 11-acre parcel, right? Because 11-acre parcel were part of a ballot measure, but there was no such thing that was applicable to those properties on the north side.
You've asked a really interesting question I've never thought about, and whether the old from the 1970s specific plan would apply to those other existing built-out parcels. I'd have to go back and look at it and read it from that perspective.
And if new development were proposed, provided they weren't going through a state streamlining route, they would be subject to CEQA. So there would be mitigations for any habitat loss or what have you for the monarch.
And wildfire.
And wildfire as well, actually, yes. Margot Cunningham does have her hand raised if you.
Yeah. Why don't we hear her comment?
Hello. Yes, my understanding about the condos 555 through 535 Pierce is that they were allowed to build there as long as they preserved the open space behind. And that was part of the agreement of how the city allowed them to build there. And also the terrain is so steep there that building would be quite a challenge. Couple other things I wanted to point out is that the monarchs don't care what property is whose. They just care about what trees and what areas they like. And it happens to be both on public city land and private land. And the other thing is that the monarchs are on the candidate list for federal endangered species status. So anything, that's something that we're considering in our plan. When we come up with our draft plan, we need to run it by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to make sure that we're okay with monarchs on that point.
All right, thank you. That was one of my other questions or thoughts, is are monarchs federally protected? And if so, that changes the 11-acre parcel process or
It might.
ability to build quite a lot. But somehow I would love to see those areas of private property somehow incorporated into the monarch habitat protection, one way or the other. I don't know how that would be, but it seems like it would be a critical part of that habitat. So if we lost those parts, we would most likely lose whatever we have on our park, on our land. So
We shouldn't get too far into a discussion of that parcel, since that's not really what's on the
Fair enough.
agenda. But
Fair enough.
we would
Okay.
definitely, I would envision whatever plan comes forward, whoever brings it, we would really be encouraging whatever development is going to happen to be as close to Pierce Street as possible for all sorts of different reasons, including the protection of the habitat and the expansion of the public access.
And soil disturbance.
And as a practical matter, it's probably the easiest place to build down closer to Pierce anyhow.
Yeah. And then I guess, is anything going to happen this spring? There was some mention about removing some eucalyptus in the spring before it gets too dry. Is that going to happen some of this spring? Margot again has her.
Yeah, Margot, do you want to answer that, or you want me to take a shot?
Yeah, I'm just working on that now. We have funding to remove some high-priority trees along Jackson and Taft on the east side of the hill, across from houses. And we had previously identified last year 23 trees that we could remove. And I'm gonna revisit that list and see if those are still the trees we want to remove, or maybe add or subtract a few. But that would not happen until September, because we don't want to, birds are starting to nest this time of year, so we want to avoid that. And then it's also the driest time of year, so there's less rain and wind. And then we want to get it done before the monarchs start arriving, which is usually around October. So September is the sweet time of month for doing this. And so this is before the plan would be implemented. So this is just high priority trees that we're looking at that are eroding on the slope above the streets, or some may be dead or mostly dead, some are leaning. So those are ones that we're looking at. And we want to also work with our partner Bay Area Redwood to reuse some of the logs from some of those trees to, again, mill it into wood that we can use back on the hill. Like, we built a retaining wall along Taft, and we've been using some of that lumber in other areas along trails on the hill.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you very much. Unless there's any other comment, I think we could go ahead and close this item and move on to the next item, which is item 8-2, Street Tree Management Plan Update, information only. Hand it back to.
And I'll again preface it the same way as that I'm not the subject matter expert on this, but it's really interesting work, and I think it's something that the commission will want to know about. And again, Parks, Recreation, Open Space Commission is taking the lead. We do expect to make a presentation to them at their next meeting on April 11th. That's 2 weeks from tomorrow. So I'm going to give you a portion of a presentation that our consultant gave that commission recently. Bear with me here a second. All right. So for this project, we're working with a firm called Port Science Bartlett Consulting. They are specialists in urban trees and arborists. They've done a lot of work in other cities with developing a plan to help cities manage their street trees. I'll move on to the next slide here to tell you it's a little bit more informative. So the street tree management plan is really intended to be a tool both for setting policy, citywide policy ultimately, but for the city council, as well as a tool for us at the staff level to know what kind of financial resources it takes and what the program that we should be doing on a day-to-day basis is. So we're focusing on trees in the city right-of-way. We're not looking at trees on private property. That's not something that the city does right now. As you know, as a planning commission, we don't regulate those with a few little exceptions. There's nothing in our codes about the management of trees on private property. We're also not talking about trees in parks. We would prefer that a discussion about trees in parks really be focused on that park and the function of that park, rather than, and so what kind of a tree is and where it is and how it should be maintained should be thought of in the context of the use of the park rather than this. So we're really essentially focusing on trees that are line our streets and in front of people's homes and so forth. This has been, again, a project that has emerged in the last couple of years. The first phase has been completed, and that was a data collection phase. We hired a consulting firm to inventory all of our street trees. And now if you go onto the city's Public Works Department webpage, there is an online portal where you can look at basically our graphic information system, and you can see, click on any tree, and you can see its condition, roughly its condition and the species. So that was the baseline data collection effort. It doesn't go into a great level of detail. There was quite, thousands of trees that they documented. It was so it's not a full arborist report by any means on all of those, but it does give us at least a base to start from. Our consultants are looking to benchmark what we could do in Albany against what other cities are doing. And there's a lot of creative work going on with street tree protection and street tree development and management. So they're looking at other similar cities. And from that would be presenting a range of costs depending on what responsibilities the city takes on and what responsibilities are shared with property owners. The way our municipal code is written today, it's similar to historically how we have managed sidewalks, which is it's on city right-of-way, city property, but it's the adjacent property owner's responsibility. And that is what most cities have done in California for decades. It's, I think it's a fair question to ask, is that the best approach to creating again, a vibrant urban street? And the reality is, even though street trees are technically the responsibility of the adjacent property owner, we spend a lot of time taking care of them. We deal with them when there's a hazard in many cases. If there is a limb falls, or if more significant damage caused by a city street tree, again, even though in the code it might say it's a responsibility of the property owner, we end up getting those claims filed against the city as well. So I think what we're probably going to be bringing forth, well, I know we'll be bringing forth, I'm not sure exactly what form it will be, but bringing forth a recommendation where the city is more proactive about the responsibility for planting and maintaining the trees to keep them healthy and not only increase the aesthetic benefit, but also just manage our risk a little bit better than maybe what we've been doing historically. And then along with that is how many people do we need? What kind of financial resources do we need to make that work?
What What is the code for liability for the sidewalk accidents?
It's the same thing that technically if in front of a residence there's a uplift in the sidewalk and someone trips, technically the property owner next to that lifted sidewalk could be, their insurance would be liable for paying that claim.
Is it codified in our city code?
It is, yeah.
I see. Because some cities don't have that, and so in that case, I think it is not the property owner's liability, responsibility. They are responsible for, I think, sidewalk repair, but not for the accidents.
As it turns out, most of the time we end up, I don't know whether property owners have had to pay claims. We certainly have paid claims when people are injured. Whether it's a tripping on a sidewalk or a tree branch falling on a car, which is the typical thing that happens in wintertime. One way or the other, we have been paying claims. I don't know whether, as a practical matter, people, the residents or the homeowner, the property owners have been paying or not. I just don't know. This slide shows kind of the summary of the condition of our existing street trees. This came from this first phase data collection, and total number of trees, as you can see, 4,900. A large majority of them are in good to fair condition. Relatively small are really, in this inventory there were 11 dead, 1 critically hazardous condition. So this gives us an idea of what we're starting with. And we certainly want to get a lot of these poor and fair trees into the good condition, at least, if we can, and if not, maintain those trees that are in worse condition so that they're not a hazard over time.
And this is intended to be a list of all the trees, all the street trees?
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
This slide is a ranking of the most common species of street trees that we have. And there are various rules of thumb in the arborist community. Again, this is kind of getting out of my area of expertise, but what I've learned is there are rules of thumb in the arborist community about wanting to have a variety of species in an area so that if a disease comes through that might impact one particular species, it doesn't wipe out the whole area. And also it just kind of makes it, Albany is a place where it's not we're not Paris or something where there's a line of trees that are avenues where you have one species that it's really important to keep that. This is a city that is much more diverse in its urban setting, and so having a mix of trees is nice.
I suppose that would support a bigger biodiverse community of animals or insects.
I would think so, yeah.
Birds or
Yes.
whatever as well.
The other thing about this graph, just to point out to you, the green are the larger trees. The grayish blue, I guess, is medium-sized trees, and then the yellowish color are smaller trees. So our most common tree is a crepe myrtle. It's a relatively small tree. And again, we want bigger trees if we can get them, but there are considerations and conflicts that come up a lot. One of the big ones is utility lines. We don't want trees, and PG&E, in fact, won't allow trees to grow into some of the high voltage lines. Not every utility line is high voltage, but in areas where there are high voltage lines, a small or medium-sized tree might be more appropriate. And there's also circumstances where there's just not enough soil mass to support a larger tree. Not only does the tree need room above ground, it needs room below ground for its roots to be successful. So there are a mix of trees that we would want to encourage in different locations, and what we hope to get, one of the things we hope to get out of this management plan is some kind of published criteria about that decision making to so that people can understand and so that we can understand, hey, this is a location that's well suited to a large tree on maybe one side of the street, and then the utility line on the other side of the street, it's maybe a smaller tree, and think about the mix of species.
Do you happen to know which of these trees are currently on the approved street tree list?
I personally don't know.
Okay.
Crepe myrtle is, I think, a couple of them, yeah.
And I think we'll have a new list that comes out after all this is done. And climate change also is impacting the list of what might have been good, what we thought was good 20 years ago is going to be different than what we think will be good 20 years into the future as we deal with different kinds of weather patterns. This is a little bit hard to read, but it's an interesting graph, and I'll try to talk through it. There's a software program called iTree. It's developed by one of the professional arborist associations, national arborist associations, and it's basically takes, I think, aerial photographs and maybe GIS data and kind of gives us an overview of what does the city's overall footprint look like from an arborist perspective. And I realize this legend here is not readable. It's barely readable on a computer screen, but just to give you an idea of the overall, again, footprint of the city from the perspective of kind of aerial view, I guess you could say. This brown column, the first one is bare soil, or perhaps grasses. The second one, the second one is grasses. So the first one here is roughly 12% of the city is kind of open ground. Something probably around 8 or 9% are grasses. This next column, the black one, the largest one, is 24%. That's actual building footprint. This gray is impervious, other impervious surfaces that are not road related. So this could be driveways or parking lots or something like that. The red is roads themselves, impervious roads. This dark green is what we're talking about, street trees. That's less than 5% of the overall footprint of the city. And then this lighter green are other trees. So I presume this is like what we were just talking about, Albany Hill and other parks, and private trees. And then lastly, the small percentage, it looks like it's 2 or 3%, is water areas. Obviously not including the bay as part of that.
Are they considering the tree canopy to calculate the tree area here, or they're considering the kind of planter, the soil area of the tree?
I don't know enough
That
about.
would be overlapping the streets, and sidewalks, and that would not be like, add up to 100%.
I understand your question. I don't know enough about this, but that's
that also kind of gives you, different, idea of permeability.
yes.
Of course, canopy is important, as important as ground permeability, but this is, I think, doesn't add up to 100%. If they assume canopy, then there would be street impermeable area underneath canopy also.
Right. I wish I knew more about this to be able to answer your question, but
this is interesting graphs, yeah.
This next slide just shows some of the calculation that we are doing in terms of climate change, in particular, looking at the technical benefits of trees. And this is urban trees, so this is everything, both street trees and private trees. And this shows, list of things that they can estimate: carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, sulfur dioxide, particulates of small and large. So again, this is far outside of my expertise. I don't know anything about this methodology, but it is part of the work that our consultant is doing and will be presenting ultimately.
Yeah, it's hard to tell what unit they're using as the base for that. Can't see it very well, but
Is it per tree or?
per acre, I don't know, or something.
I think this is citywide,
Citywide,
I believe.
or, okay, it would be interesting to know what kind of base unit they're using for that.
Well, the amounts are in pounds.
Yeah, no, but I mean, what sort of
Right, yeah.
geographical area or what physical area on the ground or per tree or per, I don't know, block or per city or just some definition.
The people who are working more directly with this will be at the Parks Commission, and I'll make sure they are ready for that question.
I think these are per acre. Yeah, per acre per year.
Oh, that's right. In the small footnote at the bottom, it does say per acre per year.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Pounds per acre per year, okay.
That helps, yeah, thank you.
This is the carbon sequestration. Same thing. This looks to be per acre year. Moving on here, the consultant is looking at 8 different cities, some of which are nearby and others that they've worked with closely, and so they've got a little bit more detail. And in different cities that are more actively maintaining the trees, so that we get a good cost estimate of what, if we have a vision for improving the street trees, what is that going to cost us? And then that, of course, leads to a discussion of where does that money come from, and what are the trade-offs that come with the city taking on more responsibility. This gives you an idea of
Can I ask a question about that? I know I'm not supposed to, but was there any study about cities that participate in tree management, that their trees are healthier than those that don't?
That's an interesting question. I think that's a great question. I don't know that they've documented that in a formal way. I haven't heard anything about that, but I would hope so. I mean, that's the whole point. These are just some of the rough numbers that they presented to the Parks Commission in their last presentation about how much it costs to actively manage a tree. And by that means just coming by every few years. It's not necessarily every year, but coming by every few years, doing some hopefully light pruning, and addressing any obvious risks before it becomes a problem, before there's either damage or more significant work that needs to be done to keep the tree healthy. And make the other thing that is part of maintenance is making our sidewalks passable for people who are walking by, and keep folks from bumping their heads on tree branches or narrowing the sidewalk so it becomes impassable for some people. We have started early on in the even before hiring the consultant, city staff did a preliminary survey, community survey, about what was important and how people felt about street trees. Again, I'm sorry, this is a little hard to read, but the 2 most popular aspects of street trees are this top line, shading. The green is shading. The second is neighborhood aesthetics. The third is air quality, this purple one in the middle. And then there are a series of other things here. What I do want to mention is we will shortly be rolling out with a new survey that is intended to drill a little bit deeper into some of these trade-off questions about how do people feel about the city taking on responsibility. Some people may not want us to do that. And we'll probably be releasing that. We hope to be releasing that in the next week or so. It will certainly be up and running for the upcoming Community Expo, which is on April 27th, where we'll be able to talk in a lot more detail about that survey. And we'll have more information from our consultant by then as well. The other thing I'll mention about this survey, just in passing, is that we didn't necessarily get a representative sample of the community when we did this survey. We realized that we were mostly getting people who were homeowners, and that's terrific to hear from homeowners, but we also want to hear from people who are renters. Much of our population, roughly half our population, are renters. And so we're going to be striving to get this out and get feedback from a larger distribution of people, hopefully. But nonetheless, this is good information to start with. A little bit more detail about the results of the survey here. I don't know that I necessarily need to read the numbers off, but it is in the materials if you're interested. Again, the top three are air quality, shading, and neighborhood aesthetic. And shading is not just, it's nice to be in a shaded area, but it also deals with the more significant heat island effect that really can affect quality of life for many people that don't have, like most people in Albany, don't have air conditioning in those hot days that we're getting more and more of. One of the questions we did pose, without really talking about the trade-offs, we did pose the question of whether people wanted the city to take more responsibility for tree care and maintenance. As you can see, 51% expressed an interest in the city to take on more responsibility.
Does it include watering?
Well, that is an interesting, that is something that we really encourage people to do today, in particular the first few years of the life of a tree. I've learned that that's super important. If we were to take responsibility for maintenance, we could more systematically make sure trees receive the water that they need. Some people are really good about running the hose out to or using the bags around the trunks to make sure they're watered, but others may not be, and may not be doing it at the right timing of the year and so forth. So we could take that on. It would be with 5,000 trees and planting hopefully dozens, if not hundreds, every year. There's a lot of work that would go into that, and a lot of equipment that would be, in terms of trucks and so forth, that would be required to get the water to the trees.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I think that's why I asked that question. Like when we say care and maintenance, like grown trees, pruning, cleaning and all that is one thing. But when there are new saplings planted, then taking care of that for at least 4 years, whatever is necessary, is different logistics as you just mentioned. And so if city commits to that, that would be a big cost.
Yes.
So there are, I think, two parts.
Yeah. Moving along. Concerns about trees. And you can see these numbers. The top two were blocking signage and sidewalk damage. When we do sidewalk projects now, we do try to address the root issue, the issue that roots are creating. In some cases, we'll try to, if necessary, reroute the sidewalk around a tree well a little bit more than maybe than what exists today. In some cases, very selective root cutting can be, with our arborist approval, can help preserve this sidewalk without damaging the tree. So sidewalk damage is a real issue that people worry about, and then, as you can see, block signage is another one that people worry about. I think this pretty much wraps up the presentation. Some of the discussion issues that will be coming out of the study, hopefully, is the decisions about sharing responsibility. Where do we want to go with that? And hand in hand with that responsibility is the cost of doing that, of maintaining, and who takes on that cost. And the third is just to build up. I think we have a pretty solid foundation of information about street trees, but to add to that and build on that, so that if people want to learn more about how to maintain the tree that's in front of their home, or what type of tree that they might want to plant. And some of this stuff is, even though we're focused on street trees, it's perfectly applicable to a tree in someone's yard. So we're just trying to build out that foundation of information to share with everybody. And these are the consultants that we're working with at Hort Science Bartlett. So again, sorry I'm not the subject matter expert this evening, but they will be speaking to the Parks, Recreation, Open Space Commission on April 11th.
Okay, thank you very much. Why don't we take public comment, if there is any? There's no one in the room, so if there's anyone online, this
Yeah, I
is your
don't
chance to
believe
speak.
so, but if you'd like to speak, please use the raise the hand icon. No one.
Okay, we'll close public comment and move back to commission discussion. Any more thoughts or questions or comments?
My only other question was, how do trees remove particulate matter from the environment? I don't know if you know that one or not.
I'd
Okay.
be guessing. It'd be an amateur guess, so I'd rather not,
I can attend the next
yeah.
ROSC meeting.
Commissioner Moment, any more comments or questions? Okay, well, I guess my thought was, this is going to lead to a planting plan. That's not really mentioned in this, but is that?
It will, I think, at a conceptual level, I would say, it's not going to go individual tree wells of this is going to be this kind of tree and it's going to be that kind of tree. But it would be at a conceptual level a tool to use for individual decisions.
I suppose we could see what streets have fewer trees, where there's better opportunity, that sort of thing. So I think
I do,
that's all
yes.
part of the climate action plan, increase the tree canopy, so.
Right. I do think it will, and I think it's very important for it to identify areas of the city that are less served by street trees and maybe focus energies on those particular areas sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I think for aesthetics and all the other reasons, would make it a little fairer across the city and more attractive. And it's amazing what trees do for a street. It turns what can be rather ordinary, banal housing areas into nice neighborhoods, what people perceive of as very nice neighborhoods. So it's really a great thing to be doing. So to just move back one step, this is mostly looking at what we've got, how to maintain that, and not necessarily a new planting plan yet. Is that my understanding?
Well, no, I think it's intended to look forward to what do we need to do to improve the street tree program. So
Overall,
it's,
right.
How many people do we need? What are the guidelines for us to use in the future? But as I said before, it's not. I don't think it's intended. We're not going to the level of individual blocks to say we're going to plant a certain tree.
But it will make whatever we do going forward more successful,
Yes,
whatever we do.
absolutely.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I mean, when I first moved to Albany, it was Tony Wolcott who was the arborist, and we had a great block party tree planting, and we planted about 10 trees when my kids were about 8 or 9, and it was really fun. I mean, that was a great thing. I wish we could encourage that more often.
Tony was very dynamic personality, and
Yeah.
that was fun.
But it's a great way to, build your community and your neighborhood, do something good for your street, do something good for the city, et cetera. And now those trees are getting to be 15 feet tall, 20 feet tall, so it's really gratifying. Well, unless there's any other comment, I think we
I
can.
just have one related
One more?
comment. Like if the city takes up the responsibility of maintaining, then can the city go ahead and plant trees where there is less tree canopy, rather than like relying on the property owners to be discretionary, and like typically currently that is what is happening. Like city is totally relying on the individual property owners to come to the city, apply for tree planting application, and then the city, plants the tree. That's what I did last year.
Yeah. I think we do, with more resources, we can be more proactive. I think you're right, and maybe not completely reactive. We're not in a completely reactive mode now, but we certainly do. If somebody comes to us and wants a tree, we certainly respond to that. I believe that in some cases we are proactive when we see an opportunity or we have some trees to plant. But that's really where, again, kind of getting out of my day-to-day expertise, that's in our Public Works Department with our urban forestry program and how they decide on a day-to-day basis what they do.
Because I think until last, 2 years back, people have to pay for, getting the tree planted. Then, then it became free. City, covered the cost, but not everyone knew. And this year, I think last month, there were, flyers in the mailboxes, letting people know that city will take care of the planting if they want any trees to be planted in their property or on sidewalk. So it's kind of, moving to that direction. But if city commits to taking care of the trees, newly planted trees particularly, then I think, there could be some, more response to that, and, people might, allow more trees to be planted in front of their properties.
That would be great, and it's just making sure we do it, we have the people to do it, and the resources to do it.
Yeah, so it would be, I think, helpful to have kind of a, priority areas marked, like where there are fewer street trees.
The one area that I think this will come back to directly into the commission business from time to time is when we get these larger projects, or even for that matter, the day-to-day projects where street tree opportunity may present itself. Hopefully some of the conclusions of this plan will help inform you, the commissioners, on when you're looking at an application, hey, this is something you should think about in the landscape plan. I think these days we tend to be very reactive about what we see, what the applicant proposes, and maybe this becomes a tool that, in addition to the Public Works Department being more proactive, you can be more proactive as well.
But we do require tree planting as part of a
Right.
major project.
Right.
Right.
And just being better, kind of giving perhaps better, or more detailed direction and conditions of approval when you're doing that.
Okay, sounds great. Okay, so we'll close item 8-2, move on to item 9, which is next meeting, April 24th, 2024. And that's it. So we'll just call this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.